Luxury subcompact crossovers are big business in America. That's why we have so many options to choose from, and just about all of the options are relatively young. The oldest entry in this segment is currently only about 4 years old. Infiniti's entry in this segment is the second generation QX50. The first generation QX50, also known as the FX, was an awful lot of fun. It was one of the first crossovers in this segment. It was rear-wheel drive, it had a big V8 engine. None of that is going on in this QX50. This is now a front-wheel drive based crossover that, instead of focusing on driving dynamics, is more focused on interior styling, exterior styling, refinement, and a quiet drive. How does that position the QX50 in this very crowded segment? Let's take a look. Up front, the QX50 certainly looks like a member of the Infiniti family. It wears the same styling that we see in the Q50 sedan and Q60 coupe, even though this shares no mechanical components with those other vehicles. We have full LED headlamps in all models, but not the same headlamps. That is important because as you move your way on up to the top, we do get headlamps that perform a little bit better in some of the independent tests out there. Because the QX50 is so new, 2020 focuses on adjusting option packages. There are also 2 new trim levels for 2020, and we get a new infotainment system on the inside, but the bulk of the QX50 is the same as 2019. The safety systems have been adjusted a little bit, so now all models get standard autonomous emergency braking without pedestrian detection. We also get collision warning. We then have rear emergency braking, rear cross traffic detection, and blind spot monitoring. But for some reason, radar adaptive cruise control is not standard. And that is a feature that you will find standard on some of the competition. However, it's worth noting that most of the competition that gives you adaptive cruise control standard will not give you blind spot monitoring. So Infiniti has decided to trade the one for the other. If you do get radar adaptive cruise control, then the emergency braking system includes pedestrian detection, and then ProPilot Assist is also available. That gives us Infiniti's more aggressive lane centering system and more of a semi-autonomous driving feature. At 184.7 inches long, this is about the same size overall as a Volvo Xc60, sort of in the middle of the compact luxury crossover segment. From this angle, you can see that the side profile is definitely very different than the previous generation QX50, which had that beautiful long hood proportion and then really a dramatic swoop towards the rear. That reduced cargo practicality, and it really had a negative impact on rear seat legroom as well. Those are 2 areas that Infiniti really focused on with this QX50. We have one of the largest cargo areas in this segment and pretty decent overall rear legroom as well. The rear end styling definitely feels fresher than the Infiniti QX60, and you can notice that we have a more vertical hatchback here than we found in the previous QX50. Down below we have twin exhaust tips back there. The model that we're driving is all-wheel drive, so we have that all-wheel drive badge right there. You'll notice that we have full LED tail lamp modules, but the turn signals are red, not amber. Under the hood of the QX50, we find just one engine. It's a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engine producing 268 horsepower and 280 pound-feet of torque. On the surface of things, that sounds very much like just about every other entry in this segment. But personally, I think this engine is one of the most interesting engines that you can buy in the world for 2020, because this is the world's first variable compression engine. Other manufacturers have attempted to change the effective compression ratio of their engines by delaying the closure of intake valves, so as the compression stroke is happening, you're actually pushing some of the air back out the intake system. That's not what's going on in this engine. This engine has a mechanical linkage, so it actually changes the way the piston is moving in the cylinder, and it makes the compression stroke a little bit shorter or a little bit longer, depending on exactly what the engine is after, whether it's efficiency or power at any exact moment. And it can change that compression ratio very rapidly. The theory behind this engine design is that they're trying to give us more power and more efficiency than you would otherwise be able to get out of a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. Now, on the downside, we don't have more power or more efficiency than in some of the competitive engines that are available in this segment. I don't know exactly why that is. I suspect it probably has more to do with the transmission and the overall design of this vehicle than the engine itself. But this is still one of the coolest engines that you can buy for 2020. It is, however, worth noting that 268 horsepower is less power than we find in something like the Alfa Romeo Stelvio or the Acura RDX. Overall 0 to 60 performance is sort of in the middle of this segment, not at the upper end of this segment, and the only transmission on offer is a continuously variable transmission. That gives us 25 miles per gallon if you choose all-wheel drive, like this model is equipped, 26 if you get front-wheel drive. You'll notice that there are a number of competitors that give you better fuel economy than that. As I've come to expect from Infiniti, front seat comfort is absolutely excellent, but it is worth noting that these seats are not as adjustable even in this top-end trim as some of the competition. We don't have a 4-way adjustable lumbar support on the driver's side, which I do think is a little bit of a misstep. On the other hand, Infiniti does give us a powered steering column that is memory linked, something that we don't find in, for instance, the Volvo Xc60, and the passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver's seat, including the adjustable lumbar support. Hopping into the back seat, we certainly find more rear legroom than we had in the previous generation small Infiniti. We have about 3 or 4 inches of legroom left with this front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. This is about the same kind of room that you'll find in the back of a Mercedes-Benz GLC. However, it is worth noting that the Acura RDX is enormous in the back seat, so if you're looking for something that has more rear seat accommodations for larger folks or for rear-facing child seats, something like the RDX may be a better option. If I move over to the middle seat here, you'll notice that I still have a pretty generous amount of headroom, even though this seat is definitely higher off the ground. That's because we have a pretty tall ceiling, a fairly square overall profile. Scooting all the way over to the right, you can see with this front seat moved all the way back in its tracks, I still have about 2 inches of legroom left. And there's some nice touches back here, like integrated window shades in the trim that we're looking at. Rear seat passengers have a padded center armrest with cup holders. The shoulder belt for the center seat position comes out of the seat itself. These seats offer a recline function, so we have a very upright position right like that. And very unusually for a 2-row crossover, the second row seats slide forward and backward. This allows you to square off the cargo area in the rear, give yourself more cargo room, and you can also see how much these seats recline there. When taking a look at the numbers, it's clear that Infiniti was really prioritizing cargo capacity, perhaps a little bit over rear seat legroom. Behind the rear hatch, we find 31.4 cubic feet of storage space, making this one of the largest cargo areas in this segment, even though the QX50 is not among the biggest. In terms of comparisons, this is nearly double the cargo area that we find in a Lexus NX, and that's why we were able to squeeze 5 24-inch roller bags back here in the cargo area. Taking a peek under the load floor, you can see that we have an additional storage area. This is where we have things like our tire iron, the tow hook, some additional storage pockets there. If we lift it all the way up, this is where we have the amplifier for the audio system, the subwoofer right there, and you'll notice we don't have a spare tire. That's because the QX50 does use run flats. On the side of the cargo area, we have one grocery bag hook. I do wish there were multiples back here that would be even handier. And then we have a lever so that way you can fold down the rear seat backs from the cargo area. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in the very top end trim, so we have this very attractive tricolor interior design that we'll see here in a bit with a brown suede-like headliner. This is Alcantara, which is an imitation suede product. We also have this large panoramic moonroof that extends to just over the rear passengers' heads. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, 2-way adjustable headrests, and from this angle you can again see that rear shade that's integrated into the rear doors. The upholstery in this model is ivory leather. You can see that we have a brown leather insert to coordinate with what's going on the B-pillars and on the ceiling. And then in the center of the seat we have a perforated section because these seats are ventilated as well as heated. You see we have a diamond pattern stitched right into there as well. It's a very attractive look overall. And as we move on over to the front doors, this is where we start seeing the addition of another color. It's a little bit difficult to tell on camera, but this is a navy sort of suede right there. Same material that's going on the ceiling, only navy in color. So the upper section of the door right there is brown. We then have this navy section with a lot of stitching going on there. Very attractive design overall. Real wood trim below that, metallic trim, more stitched material as we go on down the door, a very soft touch armrest, and then down there at the bottom of the door we have some brown plastics that again match what's going on the ceiling. It's a very well done look overall. We also have metal speaker grills. This is the up-level optional Bose Performance audio system. And as we move from the doors on over to the dashboard, you can see that this multicolor design continues. So we have more of that suede material going on right there on the dashboard. The real wood trim, brown upper stitched section of the dashboard. We then have an ivory lower stitched section of the dashboard. There is a nighttime accent strip that will illuminate right there under that wood trim. We then have the stitched materials going on right here around the glove box. Overall, this is one of the nicer interiors in this segment. I think the Volvo has some of the best build quality as far as compact crossovers in America go, but this really is a very close second. The glove compartment is a slot-style compartment. I did have troubles fitting a larger tablet computer in there, but very small ones and phones should certainly fit. The attention to detail continues as we move on over to the center of the dashboard where we find more of that suede material in these little nooks and crannies. Again, a lot of stitching going on. It has a very, very premium look and a good design as things wrap around from one side to the other. Here in the center of the dashboard, you'll notice one of the changes for 2020, which is we now have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It occupies this upper screen in the Infiniti 2-screen infotainment system. This software package is migrating its way across essentially every member of the Infiniti lineup for 2020, so you will finally get CarPlay and Android Auto in just about all of the Infiniti SUVs out there. This updated software is rolling out to just about every Infiniti in the lineup. You'll see that smartphone integration occupies this upper screen right here. You can see that we get access to our typical CarPlay interface, same with Android Auto. This is a slightly larger screen than we see below. It also uses a different screen technology. So this lower screen is a little bit smaller, but it does appear to be a little bit crisper in person. We get some physical buttons for the climate control on either side of that, and this system right here is where you would adjust some of the unique features in this vehicle. For instance, if we go over here to the drive mode selector, you'll notice we have steering right here. It's because you can change the response and the mode right there. This does have the direct adaptive steering system that we saw in other Infiniti models. Below the infotainment screen, we find the USB inputs for the system. There's a USB-C and a USB-A. There's also a little door that you can close, but not when the cable is connected. So you would have to pull that out right like that. Then you could close off the cup holders and that area. The cup holders are a little on the small side. They're also a little close together. So some of those large takeout drinks may have troubles fitting in there, especially if you wanted to put two in at the same time. You'll find the engine start-stop button over here, a different shifter than we find in a lot of Infiniti vehicles. It's a joystick-style shifter. There's a button right up front that unlocks the system. Pull back for drive or manual mode. We push forward for reverse like that. Neutral is a toggle in between, and then park is this button right here. There's a drive mode toggle right there, so that you can switch between personal, sport, standard, and eco, an electric parking brake, auto brake hold, and then a controller for the infotainment system. As we've seen in Infiniti's infotainment systems for a while, you have three different input methods. You can use this rotary controller here where there's a direct access for camera and for the map, or you can simply touch the screen because both screens are touch screens, or you can use this toggle on the steering wheel to scroll through options on the upper screen and then select items with the OK button. This won't control the lower screen, but you can do a lot of the system functions like add points of interest to your navigation destination, change the audio source, etc. using this toggle right here. The asymmetrical design of the center console continues over here to the center armrest, where we have leather on one side and this Alcantara fabric on the other. This opens to reveal a moderately sized storage compartment with a single USB charge port. Instead of a full LCD cluster like we see in some of the competition, we have a smaller LCD right there in the middle, and then physical dials for the speedometer and tachometer. The display is controlled via some buttons on the steering wheel, and it gives us a bevy of information, including the status of the variable compression system and the boost pressure from the turbo. That's kind of an interesting touch. You can also see the chassis control information, speed limit information, turn-by-turn navigation directions, infotainment options, and of course trip computer readouts as well. The steering wheel is a round design. We have 3 spokes, paddle shifters on the back, and sport grips up top. On the right side of the steering wheel, we find the buttons to control that LCD in the instrument cluster. We also find the controls for the adaptive cruise control system and the button for the ProPilot Assist system if your vehicle has that. On the left side, we have infotainment buttons, volume up, down, and then this functions as track forward, backward, and it can also control, again, that infotainment screen in the center of the dash. There's a back button right there, voice command button, and then a phone button as well. The QX50 is the newest vehicle in Infiniti's lineup, and as such, they're debuting some new buttons and switches here. So we have a new button and switch arrangement over here by the headlamp controls. It's no longer right there on the turn signal stalk as before. We also have some new window switches going on here, and some updated memory seat buttons as well. Expect these designs to percolate their way through the Infiniti lineup as other models get refreshed or redesigned. In our acceleration tests, this model went 0 to 60 in 6.4 seconds. I think the reason that this is a little bit slower than some of the competition is the transmission. The starting gear ratio in this particular CVT is just not as low, just not as aggressive as some of the other options available in this segment. Most especially something like the Acura RDX. It has a very aggressive first gear, and that really helps the first gear launch. This engine also doesn't have quite as much power as some of the base engines, like the Alfa Romeo Stelvio that gives you almost 300 horsepower really. That's an incredibly quick 0 to 60 run for a base engine. Now this is still going to be a little bit faster than some base options like the Xc60 T5. However, remember that Volvo offers a number of different more powerful engines in the Xc60, and most of them are going to be faster 0 to 60 than what we see here. Personally, I wish that Infiniti had gone ahead and given us a traditional 8-speed or 9-speed automatic transmission under the hood. I think that would have been a little bit better suited to this character overall. Instead, Infiniti was trying to go for a very comfortable ride, a very refined ride, and the CVT in that vein does make a little bit of sense because acceleration is very smooth. If you're accelerating gently, it has that varying ability so you don't get those jarring shifts as you're going up the hill. For instance, it's just hanging out there at 3,000 RPM and we're accelerating up this hill. It has a very smooth character until you really start digging into the throttle. Then it's just missing a little bit of something compared to the competition. And as you step on it, those imitation shifts are just not as smooth as some of the competition's transmissions. In our braking test, this stopped from 60 miles an hour back to zero in a very respectable 113 feet. That puts this right in the competition with some of the best in this group. A very short stopping distance in a compact crossover would be about 110 feet, so we're really only about 3 feet off, and that's not a huge difference. Overall handling ability in the QX50 is definitely good, but this is tuned towards the softer side of this segment, so we get a little bit more body roll, a little bit more tip and dive than in some of the sportier options. Remember that Infiniti does not offer a higher horsepower engine option in this, so you should be comparing this to the 2-liter turbocharged competition, not the optional V6 competition or inline 6 competition, or the turbocharged or supercharged options that we find in the Volvo lineup, for instance the T6 or T8 powertrains. The QX50 may not be quite as engaging on the twisties as some of the other options in this segment, but when the going gets a little bit rougher, like the gravel road that we're on here, this has a surprisingly comfortable ride. One of the reasons I'm surprised by that is because we do have run-flat tires, and run-flat tires have a reputation for delivering a very firm, unforgiving ride, especially out on rougher roads like we're on here, but I think these tires give us a really good balance of overall handling ability and overall ride comfort, and the suspension design in the QX50 definitely is tuned towards the comfortable side of things. Now, there are a few options in this segment that do have available adaptive air suspensions, but they're not necessarily going to give you a ride that is that much more comfortable than what we see here. A lot of folks were asking me to comment on this variable compression engine and why it is that some reports have said it feels like there's just too much adjusting going on under the hood. I believe that what most people are feeling or are sensing as they're driving the vehicle really has nothing to do with the variable compression side of things. It simply has to do with the fact that we have a turbocharged engine and a CVT under the hood. And that combination is always going to feel a little bit different because the CVT is going to take a while to vary the ratio and the turbocharger is going to build boost gradually. Turbo lag in modern engine designs is obviously not as pronounced as it was in older engine designs, but it is still there. So if we're down there at about 1,000 RPM and I start digging into the throttle, it's going to take a while for the transmission to vary its ratio and then of course for the turbocharger to spool up. That's mainly what we're feeling here. When it comes to cabin isolation, this cabin came in at 70 decibels at 50 miles an hour. This is a little bit different than the last time we drove the QX50. We don't have an exact explanation for why, but this cabin does appear to be just a little bit quieter. That puts this in direct competition to the quietest entries in the compact luxury category. I touched on fuel economy a little bit earlier, but after a week of mixed driving, we have been averaging above the EPA scores. This particular model, which is the all-wheel drive version, EPA rated for 25 miles per gallon, we've been averaging 27 miles per gallon. That's a 2 mile per gallon improvement over the EPA numbers. Part of the reason for that is that the variable compression engine and the CVT are a great combination for highway fuel economy. If you're driving out on the open highway 55, 60, or even 70 miles an hour, this is going to be giving you very, very good fuel economy for the luxury segment. But we don't have an auto start-stop system and we don't have a hybrid system, so it's not going to get you to that next level of fuel economy where we do see the hybrid and plug-in hybrid options in this segment. It's also worth noting that in mixed driving, you may still get better fuel economy in some of the other options. When it comes to my overall fuel economy score, I'm going to give this particular model a B+. I have to admit that I was hoping that this particular combination of technologies, the variable compression turbo, the fact that it is a turbocharged engine, as well as the CVT, would give us even better fuel economy, but you could get 27 miles per gallon in some of the other options that would have a more traditional feel out on the road. And again, this particular combination does feel a little bit unusual, especially if you're trying to drive this vehicle a little bit harder. The shift pedals on the back of the steering wheel do help, but they will reduce your fuel economy, and they're never going to feel quite like a traditional stepped automatic. When designing this QX50, it's obvious that Infiniti was really targeting the elegant and well-designed cabin, overall driver comfort, isolation, etc. But I have to admit again that there's just a little bit too much engine noise coming into the cabin, and it's not quite as refined as some of the four-cylinder competition. But overall, the QX50 is definitely a solid option out on the road. It's comfortable, it's quiet, it handles well, and it is surprisingly efficient. Pricing is one of the main reasons that you might want to look at a QX50. It's significantly less expensive than especially the mainline German entries in the luxury segment. It starts at $37,250 for the front-wheel drive model, add $2,000 for all-wheel drive. Although the fuel economy is below the hybrid options in this segment, like the Lexus NX hybrid or the Volvo Xc60 hybrid, it is still pretty good as far as a non-hybrid model goes, so overall fuel economy is another reason you might want to get it, along with the comfortable seats. There are also a ton of attractive lease deals available from Infiniti, just like we see in their more mainstream brand Nissan. If you want to get a panoramic moonroof, that'll set you back about $40,250, notably less expensive than most of the German options as well. And if you want the interior that we had in our model, that is a little bit on the pricey side, $53,850 starting. If you want the blue interior that we had, that's going to be a little bit more expensive, but there is a different interior that has a different color scheme, but the same materials going on in that very top end trim. When we start comparing the QX60 to the competition, you'll notice that low pricing. For instance, a Mercedes-Benz GLC is going to start at least over $42,000, so notably more expensive. The lease deals aren't going to be quite as inexpensive either, and there's not as much cash on the hood. On the other hand, the GLC is going to be more fun to drive. It has a rear-wheel drive architecture. All-wheel drive is still optional on that particular model, but if you want to get higher performance options, those are available as well. There's the GLC 43, which I think is a really great performance deal in this particular segment. Then you can, of course, work up to the really expensive AMG trims, which are going to give you mind-blowing performance in that same GLC factor. Then, of course, you can work your way up into the absolutely insane AMG models at the very top of the ladder, which are going to give you mind-warping performance. Now, unfortunately, on the inside, the GLC does feel a little bit tight. The QX50 really has an awful lot of interior room and a huge cargo area. So as far as practicality goes, the Mercedes falls down on that a little bit, but I think its interior is very well put together. It's also well designed. I think it's an attractive look overall, and performance is definitely what the GLC is all about. If you're looking for a value German entry, that would be the Audi Q5. It does look a little bit more expensive, starting over $43,000, but all-wheel drive is standard. So that means that the base all-wheel drive Q5 should really be compared to the QX50 in all-wheel drive trim, and at that point it doesn't look like they're quite as far off as you might think. Audi generally does have pretty aggressive lease deals as well, because Audi is generally considered sort of the underdog German brand if you want to think of them that way. There's a lot of standard equipment on the Q5, and I think the overall look is definitely good. We also get 248 horsepower standard, and even though it doesn't have quite the same driving dynamics that we find in the Mercedes-Benz GLC or the BMW X3, I do think it is going to be a more dynamic option out on the road than the QX50. The QX50's combination of the CVT, the front-wheel drive layout, and just the softness of the vehicle overall don't make it as much fun as any of the options that we're going to be talking about here in this comparison section. The next competitor is the Volvo Xc60, which is obviously a direct competitor to the QX50, and in some ways a little bit more like the QX50 than the rest of the European options. The Xc60 starts as a front-wheel drive vehicle, all-wheel drive is optional, but after that point the Volvo starts to look a little bit more like some of the other German options, because there's a plug-in hybrid available, there are multiple different power outputs, you can get up to 400 horsepower in your Xc60. There's also the Polestar engineered one, which gives you even more. After that point, however, the Volvo does start looking more like the other European options. It definitely gets significantly more expensive than the QX50. We have a higher quality, nicer interior available, but you're definitely going to be paying for that. Multiple different power levels available. There's a turbocharged engine, a turbocharged supercharged engine, a turbocharged supercharged plug-in hybrid, and then there's a performance variant of that turbocharged supercharged plug-in hybrid. So if you want over 400 horsepower, the Volvo will definitely give that to you. If you want features like an adaptive air suspension, a really luxurious hand-stitched dash interior, those features are available in the Xc60, but they're going to cost you. It does get notably more expensive than the QX50. In terms of overall handling ability, the Volvo is also above the QX50. It actually handles an awful lot like the Audi Q5, as long as you're talking about the all-wheel drive variants of the Volvo. That's mainly because the weight balance in the Volvo and the Audi are actually pretty similar, even though the Audi starts out as a longitudinal vehicle that can send more power to the rear axle. That doesn't mean, of course, that the Xc60 is the handling champion in this segment. That award really goes to the GLC, the BMW X3, and of course the Alfa Romeo Stelvio. Speaking of the X3, that really is the benchmark in this segment. The X3 helped kick off the compact crossover thing years ago, and it still is truly the one to look at. It's not as expensive as you might think. It starts just under $42,000 before destination, which puts it a little bit closer to the QX50 than some of the other European options. Similar to a lot of other BMWs available in America, I like the overall balance of the X3, and I'm not talking about the weight distribution, I'm talking about the way that BMW has decided to tune it. It's not necessarily going to be the sportiest base model, it's not going to be the best handling base model, the fastest base model, etc., but BMW does very well in pretty much every category. There's really no area where the X3 falls below the midpoint in the compact crossover segment, and that really is quite an achievement because most vehicles are full of highs and lows. They excel in certain areas, they definitely don't excel in other areas. The QX50, for instance, has a gorgeous interior, but overall driving dynamics definitely fall below the median in this particular segment. The BMW X3 isn't like that. In every category, it definitely scores above average. Bottom line with the QX50, this is the right vehicle for you if you value overall styling, that's interior styling, exterior styling, as well as driver's seat comfort and cargo room a little bit more than overall driving dynamics. I really am not a huge fan of the way the CVT is programmed in the QX50. I don't dislike CVTs in general, but I don't think it's a great fit for the QX50, especially since nobody else in this segment is giving you one. We also don't have the same kind of performance that we find available in a lot of the competition, especially for the $54,000 to $56,000 price range of the absolute top-end trim of QX50. It just feels a little bit out of place overall. But again, the QX50 really does sell on value, styling inside and outside, and of course, driver's seat comfort. The addition of Apple CarPlay and Android Auto support for this year really help improve its value proposition as well. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and if you were shopping in this segment, what would you pick? I have to say that my top pick for 2020 has to remain the Volvo Xc60. I think it's a really good middle ground. I love the GLC, the Stelvio, the Acura RDX, and the BMW X3. Those are all really excellent picks in this luxury compact crossover segment. And I think that's really the key thing to know is that we have a ton of really excellent options, and it's very hard to choose between them. And that makes some of these choices that just fall a little bit short of the mark stick out perhaps a little bit more than they otherwise would, like the Lexus NX. Not the biggest fan of that one right at the moment. The Infiniti QX50 falls a little bit below that top end of the pack, but let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and I'll see you all later.